Welcome to Let the Boys Kiss, the creation of queer ships, where we ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon?
This week, we'll be discussing Sterek from the MTV series Teen Wolf. I'm Maddie.
And I'm Kelsey.
So, Teen Wolf. It is a show that I had watched, but you had not when we started preparing for this.
It was completely new to me. I missed Teen Wolf when it was on the air.
So the ship we're talking about is called Sterek. The characters are Stiles and Derek. And Derek is a wolf, though not necessarily a teen. And
Stiles is a teen and not a wolf.
Their ship name could be Teen Wolf.
It really should be. That's wonderful.
And the sources we are looking at, as usual, is the show. But not all of it. How much of it have you watched?
So we were initially going to do this episode of our podcast like we did the Hannibal episode. And you had given me a series of episodes to watch, which we had taken from a website, which we should probably post because the person who put together that website of Sterek episode really did.
A champ, truly.
A wonderful job. They were color-coded with hearts about sort of the intensity of the Sterekness of it all. It was very in-depth and wonderful. So I had started doing that. I watched a couple episodes of the first season, and then I watched episode 202, which is for people who've seen Teen Wolf, the season where Jackson is a Kanima, which is, if you haven't seen Teen Wolf, we're probably not going to get into it. But I was like, I'm enjoying this. I'm just going to keep watching it. And so I watched all of season 2, all of season 3. I looped back around and watched all of season 1. So I've seen all of the first 3 seasons at this point, plus the series finale, which is important for our discussion today.
Yes. And I have seen a little bit more than that, but not all of it. I know I have seen, it's possible I've seen all of season 4 and like an episode or 2 of season 5, but I don't remember it that well. And I was watching a lot of this, not necessarily right when it was on, but probably like I would watch a season right after it came out. So I was watching it almost contemporaneously. So it's been a minute. Unlike you, I watched the guide that I made for you. So I watched the like 9 or 10 episodes that I had originally planned for you. So I am fresh on some of the stuff. Mostly just the Sterek-y stuff that we're going to be talking about today.
And I guess it's worth saying, right, there were no season 4 or season 5 or other season 6 episodes within my watch guide. So it's not as if I didn't watch those.
Right.
So sorry, it's not going to be quite as fun as our Hannibal episode where I was trying to piece things together.
I definitely want to do more of something like that in the future with another show, because as I was watching just the random collection of episodes, I was really excited to see what you were making of it, because it was even fewer episodes than when we did Hannibal. So it would have been even more confusing because so much goes on in this show plot-wise. And like every episode I was watching, there were new characters that you hadn't met before. It was like a totally wild experience. So for some show, we will do that in the future. Yes. Either a show you haven't seen or a show I haven't seen.
Unfortunately, I was just having too good of a time. I had to know what was going on with Jackson and the Kanima.
I can't fault you for having too good of a time. That's always what I'm hoping for in these situations. So let's get into the why of the ship. Before we get into the specific history of Stiles and Derek together in the canon, we should talk about the fact that there's quite a bit, actually, of canon evidence, mostly subtextual, I guess, or at least not confirmed, but evidence nonetheless, that Stiles is bisexual. So we should run through all of these Stiles beats so that you have a sense of that before we get into Stiles and Derek.
So it really is just a series of moments throughout the show where Stiles either doesn't deny an attraction to men or seems to be unusually concerned about whether or not men are attracted to him.
Right.
So there is a canon gay character in the show named Danny. In the first season, Stiles is talking to Scott, who is our protagonist for the show, who is our titular Teen Wolf. And he asks him, am I not attractive to gay guys? Which he follows up by then specifically asking Danny, do you find me attractive?
And then later on, there is a case happening where virgins are getting killed or disappearing or something, and Stiles is a virgin, and he becomes very concerned that he is now in danger to this supernatural creature. And so he's in the locker room just like sort of ranting at Scott about how he needs to have sex right now. Someone needs to sex him right now. And Danny, who's also in the locker room, is next to him and jokingly is like, I'll do it. You want to come over to my house tonight? And makes him this proposition. And Stiles, instead of being like, haha, good one, Danny, is like, wait, really? He's like flattered and surprised. And then, are you serious? And then he's like, you're joking, aren't you? And Danny's like, of course. And Stiles is like, it's not nice, Danny, to toy with a guy's emotions.
And then the last bit is, again, not to get too deep into the lore, kind of around the same storyline. There's a character we meet who, when we meet her, she's with her girlfriend, and her girlfriend dies, very unfortunately. And then later, that same character is at a rave they all go to, and she starts making out with Stiles, and Stiles goes, I thought you liked girls. And the character Caitlin goes, I do like girls, do you? And Stiles goes, absolutely. So you also like boys? And Caitlin goes, absolutely, do you? And then Stiles just doesn't respond.
Yeah, it like breaks his brain.
Yeah.
She asks him, do you like boys? And he sort of like looks off into the middle distance and is like, Right. Well, that was an interesting moment for Stiles' own sense of his self-identity.
Right.
And so all of these moments together sort of add up to this picture of a nebulous bisexual Stiles that's never confirmed. Jeff Davis, the creator, has acknowledged that there is this subtext in the show and has said, we've certainly made some hints to the possibility of Stiles being bisexual, but this is not a thing that ever, like, becomes recognized canonically. But yeah, that's sort of the backdrop in which we find our two guys, Sterek and Stiles. So I guess let's run through some beats of their storyline.
Right. So as we said, Stiles is a teen. He's the best friend of our main character, Scott, who gets turned into a teen wolf. And initially they think Derek is the one who bit Scott and turned him. And so there's tension between all three of them, honestly, but certainly between Stiles and Derek. And so out of this sort of tension and banter, I think, comes the initial shipping impulse, right?
Yes. The two of them have a very bantery, I mean, I guess they're technically, like, would qualify as an enemies to lovers sort of ship, but they're not really enemies. They're, after the first couple of episodes, they're mostly begrudging allies. But banter is the main thing that defines their relationship with each other. There start to be these various moments where they're having to rely on each other because they're all constantly in life or death situations. So Derek ends up getting shot with a wolfsbane bullet. He's getting poisoned by the wolfsbane in the bullet. Scott is off somewhere else trying to figure out how to fix this, and Stiles is
sort
left,
of
right, he doesn't honestly care that much, but Stiles is left with this injured werewolf who really needs his help, and it comes to a point where he decides he is going to need to cut his arm off if Scott doesn't get here soon, because if the poison gets to his heart, he could die. And so he's demanding that Stiles be the one to cut off his arm, and Stiles is, of course, kind of concerned about how terrible that's going to be. But he does finally get to a point where he's about to do it, and then, of course, Scott comes in and saves the day. But that's the first of their, like, Derek's life is in Stiles' hands.
And they're bonding.
And then in season 1, that continues because Derek is on the run from the law. He ends up hiding out in Stiles' room, which is kind of awkward because Stiles' dad is the sheriff of the town, who's the one looking for Derek. And so they have this moment where Derek is trying to threaten Stiles into not saying anything to his dad, and he shoves him up against his bedroom door, and they're, you know, all up in each other's faces, and he's trying to threaten him, but mostly it's a lot of sexual tension where they're like staring at each other's lips and making threats, and you're like, this is super intimate. And then season 2, some more characters are introduced. There's a point where one of Derek's betas, which is a wolf that he has turned,
a wolf subordinate.
I don't know if that's how they would like it to be phrased, but yeah, that's kind of what it is in prison, and it's about to be the full moon, and so they need to get him out of there, and Derek is like, I'll get us in, I'll be the distraction, and Stiles doesn't really believe that he can be a distraction because he's just so silent and grumpy all the time.
Sour, yes.
So yeah, he's trying to be like, well, what are you gonna do? Like, tell me what you're gonna do as the distraction, and he won't tell him, and it turns out his plan is to flirt with the woman who runs the front desk, which, as Stiles comes in and sees Derek, who's so grumpy all the time, smiling, which he never does, and being sweet
charming
and flirting, with this woman, and he just can't get over it. Like, it's the last thing he expected.
I guess the next moment in season 2 is, so mentioned it before, the character Jackson is a Kanema, which is a person who gets bitten by a wolf, but they have too much emotional turmoil, so they can't turn fully into a werewolf. So instead, he turns into a lizard creature who can paralyze people with a venom, and
which is pretty freaking cool, actually.
Yeah.
His powers are great.
It's a good storyline. And so he ends up paralyzing Derek, and Stiles is with Derek again. Scott is off
doing Scott
I think
stuff.
He's playing lacrosse or something. I don't know.
He is. I think he's playing lacrosse, and Stiles was supposed to like sneak into the principal's office to steal something, and so he's in the school and runs into Derek. And this is all taking place at the pool
within the school. So Stiles ends up pulling Derek into the pool to get away from the Kanema, and they figure out that the Kanema is afraid of water. And so he ends up with Derek in the pool, just like floating him around.
Treading water and holding Derek up for hours. This is season 2. They've known each other a while at this point. I think in Stiles' mind, it's like, well, maybe we don't like each other, but obviously we need to work together. We're allies at this point. So I'm holding you up because that's what allies do. And Derek, still in his mind, is like, well, the only reason you're holding me up is because once I can be a wolf again, I'm the only one who can protect you from the Kanema. So in his mind, their relationship is still very transactional, and Stiles is not pleased that that's where Derek thinks their relationship still is. And then he's like, I'm getting really tired. I'm not going to be able to hold this up forever. I got to run to the side of the pool, get my phone, call Scott. And to do that, I'm going to have to drop you into the pool, make the call, and then pull you back up again. So you're going to have to trust me that I'm going to come back for you. And Derek is like, I don't trust you, you don't trust me, but Stiles, of course, does it anyway, and then can't get a hold of Scott, because fucking Scott he never answers his phone ever. So
not when it's important.
Goes down and pulls Derek up again, and basically gets to a point where they're both gonna go down. Stiles is too tired to hold him up. He tries to swim over to the edge of the pool and grab onto something, but he can't get it. They both go underwater, and that, of course, is when Scott shows up. He always shows up at the very last second.
If you're paralyzed, could you float in a pool? Because people float.
I have wondered that a lot, right? Because, yeah, people float. You would think if you just positioned him on his back, he would float. But it's less dramatic that way. I don't know.
And then they could both be, they could be floating around the pool like otters holding
like otters
hands.
Hooked to each other? Oh, that's a missed opportunity.
That would be so cute. Okay.
Anyway, they bond again. I think also in that episode, there's this shared moment of understanding where Derek figures out that the creature is a Kanema, and he's explaining to them what it is to be a Kanema. And Scott is, kind of getting it, I guess, but Stiles realizes, like, they have this moment where he's saying it's something wrong about the Kanema. And Stiles is like, an abomination. And he and Derek share this meaningful look where it's like, you get what I'm saying, or whatever. So yeah, their relationship is growing. They're bonding. And then talk about the last, I know you like this moment.
Yes, I think this is my favorite Sterek moment in the series. So again, they're still trying to figure out what's going on with the Kanema. It turns out the Kanema is being controlled by this character named Matt. So they all end up at the police station, and Derek has been paralyzed by the Kanema and is on the ground. Then Stiles is talking to Matt, and the Kanema paralyzes him, and he does this amazing pratfall. The way Dylan O'Brien falls.
Can we, by the way, talk about how delightful Dylan O'Brien is, and his physical comedy in particular?
Yeah, it's great. And he falls on top of Derek, and just like a classic ship moment of these two characters, one on top of the other.
You're shipping end up pressed front to front against each other for whatever reason. That's a classic ship moment. So he falls onto him, and Derek is like, get him off of me. And Matt, the villain, is like, I don't know, Derek, you two make a pretty good pair. And so then for the rest of that episode, the two of them do end up laying next to each other, both paralyzed, and having conversations about what they're going to do to get out of this situation.
All right, now we're in season 3.
Yes. And honestly, most of the season 3 moments are kind of in season 3A, because there's a very distinct change in the plot between the first half of season 3 and the second half of season 3. And Stiles isn't really himself in the second half of season 3. But we have an episode called Chaos Rising, where they're trying to get a couple of Derek's betas back who have been kidnapped, and it involves them having to plan a bank heist. And so Stiles is always the planner because he's the brains of this operation. And so he's looking over the blueprints of the bank and he's planning for, oh, we'll get into this wall and then you'll have to get through this wall and you'll do that. And Derek is like, his plan is always just to go in and wing it for the most part. So he's like, yeah, if you get me in the wall, like, it's fine. I'll get into the vault. And Stiles is like, you know, has all this information where he's like, well, you're in there, you got like 3 inches of space with which to break through this amount of wall or whatever. And he's sort of taunting Derek and he's grabbing his fist. He's like, make that big old fist, Derek, show me. And he's like putting his hand 3 inches in front of Derek's fist, and Derek punches his hand violently.
Real hard.
Very strong. And then Stiles is kind of like, he can do it. And also in that moment, Derek's trying to figure out who will come with him to get into the bank vault, and his evil Uncle Peter has no interest in joining. And so he asks, how about you? Meaning Scott, who's a werewolf. But Stiles assumes he means him, and he's like, well, if you want me to come, I'll come. Oh, you mean Scott. Okay. And then later in that season, Boyd, one of Derek's betas, ends up dying in a really depressing way. And Stiles comes over and puts a hand on Derek's shoulder to comfort him, which is nice because Derek's usually not super fond of being touched for a lot of reasons. And then weirdly, at the end of the 3rd season, obviously a lot of things plot-wise have happened, but Derek has this fever dream of Stiles out of nowhere because they haven't really interacted in a while. And this dream version of Stiles helps him talk through what's going on in the episode. He figures out what's real and he gets back to himself. And interestingly, Jeff Davis, the creator, when talking about this scene, said that the inspiration for it came from this Ambrose Bierce short story, An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, that's about a man hallucinating he's returning home to his wife as he is dying. So it's like, he loves to say there's romantic subtext to all of these Stiles and Derek moments. You didn't have to say, oh yeah, I based that scene on a man thinking about his wife.
Yeah, it could have been a different dynamic that he compared it to. But that's, you know, the majority of the moments in seasons 1 through 3. And then I guess there's the finale as well, where basically, from what I can tell, a bunch of stuff has happened in season 4, 5, and 6. There's a ton of new characters who are introduced. But in the end, everyone from all the seasons who are still alive need to team up to defeat Gerard, who is the patriarch of the hunters. And so everyone comes back. The gang's all here.
The gang's all here. So in the beginning of the episode, Scott, who's still around, still the teen wolf, but he's not a teen anymore, and his underlings now are fighting some big battle, and it's like things aren't going super well. You know, maybe they're gonna lose or something, and then out of nowhere comes Stiles' iconic blue Jeep.
They hit a guy with a car.
They hit a guy with a car, and Stiles out his window says, "You didn't think you were gonna do this without me, did you?" And then Derek pops into frame and says, "Without us." Just so silly, but also like the greatest way you could have brought those characters back into the episode. So they roll into town together from God knows where they've been.
Well, they were in South America. That's where the story they tell about, so they're explaining how they got together to the rest of the team and why they ended up showing up. And it turns out that Derek had been in South America.
Stiles has been working at the FBI, though.
He's an intern with the FBI. Yeah. And Derek is often in South America doing South American things. And basically Stiles finds out through his internship that Derek's been causing a ruckus, or they think Derek's been causing a ruckus. And so he talks his way onto a raid in another country as an intern.
Right. He's a good talker. Stiles is.
To go rescue Derek. It's a wonderful example of, when characters will tell the same story and you're revealing the truth. So initially, Stiles says he saved Derek, and they show Derek leaning on him, clinging to him.
Yeah, Stiles helping to drag him out of the building. And then Derek's like, that's not how it happened. You couldn't walk. And I know that because I was carrying you. And then they cut to Derek's version of events where he's bridal style carrying Stiles out of the building. And
very
Stiles
romantic.
is wailing about his hurt,
He'd gotten shot in the foot.
Yeah, he got shot in the toe.
Yeah.
So
it's good times.
Their dynamic continues to be delightful. I guess it stands to say that they don't get together in the end.
Yeah. It seems like Stiles is with Lydia at the end. I couldn't quite tell.
It's like vaguely implied, but not really confirmed, which I thought was an interesting way to go out. They certainly left the door open for shippers of any ilk to feel
Yeah.
like okay about the ending. But yeah, those are the beats of Derek and Stiles in the show. You wanted to talk about this trope, one of our new favorite
Yeah.
tropes that we didn't know about and before we started doing this podcast.
So I was looking at the fan lore page, and they talked about the sort of tropes this pairing generally falls into. And as you mentioned, there's a bit of enemies to lovers, but one of the tropes the fan lore brought up was small guy, big guy, which we have seen a number of examples of through this podcast, even if we didn't quite name them as that.
Yep.
But the fan lore helpfully points out a thing which I think we also noticed, which is Derek is the big guy, and he's muscular.
He's ripped. He's
jacked.
Definitely been working out.
Yeah, he's definitely jacked. But Stiles is not a small man.
No. If you look at them next to each other in the show, even early seasons, and Dylan O'Brien started the show when he was like 18 years old. So I'm sure over the course of it, he grew a couple of inches.
Right.
You know, men can grow till they're 25. But even in the early seasons, they stand next to each other. Tyler's maybe an inch taller than Dylan.
Right.
There's not a huge difference in their heights. And then you look at Dylan and it's like, he's broad. He's not a small guy.
He's got really broad shoulders, but particularly when you look at him next to Scott, to Tyler Posey, he's much broader in the shoulders. And as I noticed throughout the show, anytime you see his hands, he has enormous, what I describe as meat hooks. They're meat hooks. He has huge forearms and hands.
They're manly. They're manly hands.
This is not a tiny little boy.
It's not a small guy, but as I feel like we have encountered multiple times before, the small guy, big guy dynamic is not necessarily about physicality. It's a state of mind more than anything else.
Right. Because I think if you look at the double Q example, which I think is also the same trope, I'm pretty sure Ben Whishaw is as tall, if not taller, than
he might
Daniel
be taller.
Craig.
I mean, he's more willowy.
He's certainly thinner. It's he's less muscular.
Right.
But he's not, teeny tiny.
But I just find the trope is really about there being one like laconic, grumpier guy, who's like the brawn, I guess, and then one guy who's often neurotic and kind of loud and the brains.
Right.
That's what that trope is.
One is like hyper masculine coded, and one is less masculine.
Less hyper masculine coded. Yeah, that's really what it is. Now that we know about that trope, I see it everywhere and I look for it everywhere.
Yes.
But I think that brings us to at the end of our summation of the canon. So we should get into what the creators say and do. As always, let's start with our actors.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we should start with the Sterek themselves, Tyler Hoechlin and Dylan O'Brien. They seemingly were like pretty much on board with this ship, right? They really liked each other, I think, from every interview I've ever seen with them. They just enjoyed each other's company and enjoyed doing scenes together. So then when they found that people were enjoying their dynamic, they were both in for like, yeah, let's do more of that. We like acting together. It's fun. We like the idea of it. And then this ends up translating into both them talking about how they enjoy the ship, but also the PR machinery of the show leading into that and using their fondness for the ship to do promotional material for the show. So this happens a lot. There's tons of examples of it, but there's this particularly iconic, I guess, moment of queer baiting history of the show where Teen Wolf's nominated for some Teen Choice Award in 2012, and they make a couple of these videos where Dylan and Tyler are cuddling, there's no other word for it, on a ship. And they have Dylan say, "We're on a ship." And Tyler says, "Pun intended." The whole premise of it is them being like, vote for us, and then maybe we'll cuddle some more, basically. Yeah.
Like, if you want more of this, us wrapped around each other.
Yeah, vote for us.
Yeah.
And then they just sort of nap together. It's like a weird moment because you're watching, you're like, this is fun, and clearly they're enjoying this thing, but it's also like the weirdest transactional use of this queer ship. where it's totally apparent what they're doing. It's not hidden in any way. So that's a wild moment. But anyway, for the most part, the two of them are pretty on board with the Sterek shippers. I don't ever really see them having aggressive confrontational moments with fans about it. They're not the type where it's like, that's not how the character is, so you guys could just be quiet.
I guess we took it out. There was that quote from Dylan about how Stiles is not bisexual.
Oh yeah, that was an interesting moment. Because of all of the subtext of him being bisexual, there was a point where Dylan was saying, like, I think it's a really cool thing about the character that he can be read this way, and it went down the avenue of, like, he just isn't attracted to the gender. He sees people as people, like that sort of quote. And then almost immediately he had to, like, issue a clarification where he said that Stiles is not bisexual, which was weird. Clearly there's something going on behind the scenes there. But yeah, in terms of the Sterek-ness of it all, for the most part, they just seemed to enjoy it, whether or not it was ever going to be. I think there were moments like that too, where Tyler had sort of talked about, well, you never know with this show, kind of encouraging fans, and then later having to be like, but I didn't mean it's actually going to happen, because you never know. We'll get into this.
We're going to talk about, there's a turn as the show progresses, and it seems like the actors were then also encouraged to walk back what might have seemed like commitments.
Or, yeah, it not just commitments, but encouragement to that part of the fandom, that then later it was like, stop encouraging them. But yes, we'll get into that later.
There's one member of the cast not so into the shipping.
Tyler Posey, who plays Scott McCall, who is, as we've said, the titular Teen Wolf, the lead of the show, number one on the call sheet, I'm sure, has said, and to be fair, I don't know all of the lead up to this, but has said multiple not super fuzzy things about Sterek, but in this quote in particular, got in a bit of trouble with the fandom for saying, I think Sterek is a bizarre, weird, twisted thing, and I think that anyone who pays more attention to Sterek than the show isn't watching the show for the right reasons.
Yeah, it's not great.
It's not great. It's not what you'd want. I mean, even if you are upset about the ship for whatever reason, I think your PR training would probably teach you to just say something non-committal about it and let people make of that what they will. So I think he probably had to walk that back a little bit as well. But as we've said, like, who knows what's going on, what fans have said or done or whatever to him. We never really know what.
We just don't know what's going on with him. But it didn't seem like he was in the same space as Dylan O'Brien and Tyler Hoechlin.
But yeah, I mean, there's not a super ton to get into there. Normally at this point, we would get into the writers, creators quotes, which in this case is Jeff Davis, our creator. But not in this case, because really that is the heart of the matter. So I think we're going to save all of the Jeff Davis business for later.
Just in a little bit when we get into how the creators and fans interact, because it's a journey.
It truly is. That's a great way to phrase it. First, let's do a brief interlude where we get into the literature, starting with AO3, our fan fiction. This is a juggernaut of a ship. This is the number 3 most popular ship on our AO3 stats list. They have about 60,000 fan works in just this ship. Obviously more in Teen Wolf in general. This is the most popular ship in the Teen Wolf fandom. You know, it's a big ship. Number 3 is a big ship. So,
and when it wasn't included, what was it, on an EW poll? The Advocate put together like a March Madness of gay ships or queer ships on shows, and this one, it beat out Destio.
There was, that's its own interesting thing. I mean, it was of the moment when it beat out Destio.
Yeah, I think it was like 2014 or something, right?
But yeah, that was a moment of contention too, because fans were trying to write them in for this EW favorite ships poll, and they got artificially rejected because they weren't canon, and then fans
weren't an established will they, won't they?
Yeah, who's whatever to say they're that not means. An established will they, won't they? What the hell is an established will they, won't they? Anyway, good on the Advocate for making their own poll. So the most popular fan fiction in this ship is a fic called Lock All the Doors Behind You by Entangled Now. And it doesn't quite fit into our usual, the rules that we have mostly encountered. It's not super short, though it's also not super explicit. It's like an interesting middle ground. It's a little bit longer than our usual fics, but it is not really smutty. So the premise of it is very Teen Wolfy. Couldn't do this in most other ships. Something has happened to Derek. We don't know what it is. It happens off screen. But at first he just goes missing, and then they find him, and some sort of trauma has caused him to regress or something into this like feral werewolf state where he can't change back into his human form, doesn't really talk, doesn't seem, he's like just his base instincts and nothing else. And all of his werewolf friends try to approach him, but he views them all as threats because they all smell like werewolves. And so they bring Stiles in. Stiles is the only one that he's not threatened by. So they basically end up just like foisting him on Stiles, who is left to take care of this nonverbal werewolf creature while they all try to figure out how to fix him. What are your thoughts?
It was longer than usual.
Yeah.
But it was fine. It was, good, fine. Longer.
Yeah. It's sweet, I think. And, they end up bonding, and Stiles, in his usual Stiles way, figures out some, way to help
solution.
Derek. He's always figuring out the solution. That's Stiles' thing. But yeah, I mean, nothing hugely revolutionary to say about it. It's been a few weeks, I think, since we said this, but we do have some interesting scholarly works that we used in our research.
We've been dropping off the scholarly literature a little bit, and I think we should make a concerted effort to get back to it. But this week, it wasn't even a case of, general scholarly literature on fandom and fan fiction, how it operates. Very TeenWolf specific, and also in one case really doing the work for us in terms of the fan creator interaction. So throughout sort of the rest of the discussion, we're pretty heavily referencing two pieces. One is Clawing Through the Fourth Wall, Interactions Between the Fans and Creators of MTV's Teen Wolf by Emily Thomas. And the other is Smile, Derek. Why don't you smile more? The Objectification of Derek Hale and Queer Baiting in MTV's Teen Wolf by Jacqueline Elliott and Megan Fowler.
We love all of you, Emily, Jacqueline, and Megan. You've made this episode so much easier for us. So this finally brings us to Mr. Jeff Davis, our creator, and what are his thoughts and feelings, and how did he interact with the fandom? It is, as you said earlier, a journey.
Yes. So initially, Jeff Davis is extremely supportive of the shipping and the shipping activity. And again, as we're going to go on this journey, right, he is, I think, unfortunately for him in the end, setting some expectations which maybe he's not going to follow through on.
Yes.
So sort of the initial quote we have from him is acknowledging the actors' chemistry together. And he says, there's always a lot of fun to be had with characters who seemingly despise each other and then have to work together to survive. In a funny way, that's how a lot of romantic comedies begin. The two leads always start out absolutely hating each other until they find their common ground.
This is the first of many times that Jeff Davis himself introduces like a romantic framing.
Right.
That's how it begins, as early as the beginning of the second season. So the first season, they have a few episodes where they're having these moments together and fans got interested. And then by the time they were putting out season 2, like it had come to Jeff Davis's attention that people were shipping Stiles and Derek. And he ended up at the time tweeting to people, well, if enough fans demanded it, who knows? I could be persuaded. Smiley face.
Okay.
Oh, you did it to yourself, Jeff Davis. And so also in these, when he's first becoming aware of them and first talking about them in interviews, he kind of is having a learning experience in the beginning of the show. He wasn't aware of the concept of shipping or, I assume, queer baiting. And so he's publicly learning what shipping is and then being like, oh, that's what shipping is. I'm a shipper. Like, I used to ship Mulder and Scully on the X-Files and that sort of thing. And trying to get on the level with fans. The main experience of the early seasons of this is them doing fan outreach, trying to bring fans into the experience, and trying to have a good fun time together.
Right. And sort of outside of Davis as well, MTV is really encouraging the transformative fandom side of things, right? So we found out they're organizing fanfic contests
specifically encouraging /fanfic to be part of the submissions.
Right. And so, I guess really nicely at the beginning, it is engendering this very positive fan creator relationship. Jeff Davis is a gift becomes a catchphrase throughout the fandom, which initially very rosy, very positive because the creators are saying we're listening to you and we might
Right.
follow through on what you want.
Exactly. Well, and it's already pretty novel and refreshing to have your creators even acknowledging that your ship exists in the first place and not outright dismissing it as soon as they hear about it and saying to you, we love your shipping, we love fan fiction, we encourage your input, is basically the message that they're putting out at first.
Right.
So when do things start to take a bit of a turn?
So, I guess the problem, right, is the show is continuing on. They do not seem to be following through on all these things they're kind of playing along with. But also, the show is maybe disappointing the audience in different ways as well. Davis, in particular, gets into conflict with the fans over other kinds of representation in the show as well, not just the queer representation. So fans accuse him of sidelining characters of color. So Boyd, who we mentioned earlier on, is a black character who gets killed.
He does end up getting killed, and beforehand has very few lines.
So there are three betas. There's a white guy, a white lady, and a black guy. And I can tell you why the white guy and the white lady wanted to be turned, but did Boyd want to just be turned because he didn't have any friends?
It does seem to be sort of the implication. Like it's yeah, because the white guy is being abused by his dad and needs to like take back power in his situation. The white girl has epilepsy and it could kill her. So if she becomes a wolf, that she won't be sick anymore. And then Boyd, it is sort of like he's lonely. It's unclear. There's a lot less clarity to his storyline.
Right. So, yeah, Davis responds to this, and his response is not great.
Yeah. He writes on Tumblr, which another thing fans liked about him was that he had a Tumblr.
Oh, and there was an official TeenWolf Tumblr, too.
Yes. So he puts out this message that he calls a message about race and racism in TeenWolf. And so he sort of starts by talking about how it's difficult to be a showrunner, basically. Like, it's hard to figure out how to get all these stories in together. It's tough to get everybody equal screen time. We got budget constraints. We got supporting characters.
Yeah, the actor who plays Boyd is in a weird contract situation specifically.
Things outside the show where Sinqua Walls, who plays Boyd, didn't necessarily want to renew his contract. So sometimes you have external factors. And then he gets to talking about the fact that he is a middle-class white man, has privilege, potentially lacks insight into issues facing non-middle-class white men. And it kind of acknowledges he does skirt issues of race and sexual politics. And that's because he thinks that he might not necessarily be the best voice to handle those issues. So he leaves it with, I love the passion all of the fans bring to the show, and I'm glad it creates far more of a discourse than I ever expected. But unsurprisingly, I think if you know how the internet works, this didn't satisfy people. He got a lot of negative responses. He ends up deleting his Twitter and Tumblr accounts, which, you know, things are going bad when people ditch their social media. Fans start to complain that the writing staff for the show is not diverse enough, and that's probably contributing to their issues. So the show does start to hire some more writers of color, but it doesn't really solve the root of the issue. So obviously, as we've said, Boyd dies, so that's its own thing. Danny, who is the main gay character, is also not white. He's a person of color. And his character, for unknown reasons, never explained in the show, and also never explained outside of the show, just disappears after the end of season 3.
Yeah, it's very strange.
He never comes back. It's never explained. Outside of the show, they're like, well, I guess he graduated early.
It's not really an explanation.
So we have that. People are not really satisfied with his response to the allegations of race issues in the show. And while that's happening, we also have a change in the way that the show and Jeff Davis are addressing the issue of Sterek.
Before we move on, because I do like to always note when this comes up, and we've talked about this a bunch, right? The complaint about this being a show that just centers on the experience of white characters does not acknowledge the fact that the lead is, in fact, Hispanic.
Correct, yes. Tyler Posey, who plays Scott McCall, is Hispanic.
Yes.
And so that obviously complicates things.
Right. Which is not to say the show just because the lead is Hispanic is sufficiently diverse. That's not the argument that I'm making. I
Right.
just think it is always worthwhile when we are making the argument for more diversity to acknowledge, to not just say everyone's white when everyone's not
Right.
white. That's a thing that happens a lot, and it's like weird erasure.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we can always argue for more and better representation, but to
Definitely.
whitewash the characters that are already there is interesting. Though, as you and I were discussing earlier, in his efforts to create a world with no racism, no homophobia, like this is a stated goal of Jeff Davis, the non-whiteness of Scott is, I don't think, ever addressed in the show, which, you know, is a totally valid choice for storytelling, but also probably contributes to the fact that people are like painting the show with this brush of nobody being a person of color.
Right, which is problematic in its own way as well. We don't want to get too sidetracked. This could
No,
be
because it's a
a
rabbit hole of
lengthy
problematicness.
conversation with no clear answers. I want to acknowledge that
Yes.
Tyler Posey is not.
Yeah, I think that we'll actually come back to that in a little bit too. But yeah, while this race conversation is happening, there's a parallel conversation about what's going on with Sterek. So the like way that they had been writing to that pairing and the way people enjoyed their chemistry and they were putting more of them in the show and talking about how they were going to put more of them in the show because people liked them so much, that changes course. Takes a sharp turn, and they start to have fewer and fewer scenes with Stiles and Derek together at the same time that Stiles and Derek are getting a bunch of new female love interests in a way that neither of them really were. So fans who at this point are kind of souring on their relationship with Jeff Davis start to read this as a way that the show and the creators are intentionally trying to get people to stop shipping Sterek.
Right.
Which is interesting because it doesn't necessarily stop them from encouraging Sterek shippers when they're nominated for an award or there's something publicly where they can rally the fan base, but it doesn't ever translate into anything happening on the show.
Right.
So people are getting pretty disillusioned at this point with Jeff and the show in general. And then, yeah, we get to this kind of unfortunate quote.
Yeah, it's
Jeff
just
Davis.
not only is all this stuff actually happening, but Jeff Davis's tone towards the fans really shifts as well in a way that's it's really too bad.
It sort of feeds on itself. Like, I get it. This isn't the first time we've seen something like this. You try to be friendly with the fans, then the fans criticize you, and you can either take that criticism and use it to try to grow or whatever, or you can become defensive, as a lot of people do. So yeah, a Sterek fan in a 2013, so it really hasn't even been that long, a 2013 Q&A, a Sterek fan expresses displeasure with a relationship on the show between Derek and a female love interest, Jennifer Blake. And Davis answers, if you don't feel it's worth watching anymore, all you have to do is stop. The truth is, no show is written by the fans. It's written by normal people like me and my team of writers.
Yeah, that's mean.
Yeah, I mean, the implication that the fans are not normal people is probably not what I would have gone with.
It really is a shift in tone from, hey, I'm a shipper, to you guys are not normal.
Which is sad. We found this interesting comparison in one of our scholarly articles about the homophobia of the original film, Teen Wolf, which is technically what this show is based on, but let's be real, not at all what the show is based on. But there is, I guess, a scene in the movie where when Scott is figuring out that he's a werewolf, he's trying to tell his best friend, and his friend thinks that he's coming out to him as gay and is really concerned about that. And so is, I guess, relieved when he finds out that he's saying he's a werewolf and not that he's gay, which is a bummer of a scene. And so Jeff Davis has talked a lot of times about how when he created this show, his intention, as we said earlier, was to create this utopia with no homophobia, no racism.
What he said, right, is if it's a world where werewolves exist, it can be a world where homophobia doesn't. Which, true. It's fiction.
Love that idea. Yeah, the show starts with there are some queer characters, some POC characters, and there's not any homophobia. Like, Danny, the gay character, is best friends with Jackson, who's the asshole villain of their high school. And there's no weirdness about one of them being gay, which, side note, in the end of the show, they bring Jackson back, and it turns out he's been gay all along.
Right.
The idea of it was queer characters and straight characters can coexist in harmony and be friends with each other, and isn't that great? And then we get to a point where it's like in the first couple of seasons, Danny is the main gay character, doesn't really have any love interest or romantic life going on when it's seemingly most of the other characters are. In season 3, he does end up getting a boyfriend, which I guess potentially is in response to complaints about this. But then he ends up disappearing. Our LGBTQ characters can feel sort of sidelined in a lot of these storylines. Some of our female characters get killed off in unpleasant ways. Characters of color are dying. And so it's starting to feel a little bit less like his happy, fun utopia.
Well, it's just falling into the patterns that we see over and over again. Like, it's not necessarily an intentional decision, but it is like you fall into patterns of heteronormativity. You fall into
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if we've said this, but Jeff Davis is a gay man. We've discussed this many times. Any writer, gay, straight, whatever, can fall into the same heteronormativity, androcentrism, like all of the things that affect society affect writers too, no matter what the writer's orientation. So what had started with the best of intentions in this like fun, friendly, loving environment takes a turn, which is sad. This is kind of like a tragedy of a story.
Yeah, it is.
That's not to say that we shouldn't talk about the good things about this show. I think the attempts, at least in the beginning, to bring fandom in on the creative process and accept shippers, which is a thing that a lot of shows definitely don't do, and just use social media to engage with fans on a level that is, at least was at the time, pretty unconventional. Is cool.
I think it's an interesting case study. So I think in one of the papers we read as well, they compared it to the Lord of the Rings example that we talked about, where Peter Jackson and co. use similar techniques to bring fans in. But as we talked about, right, and as you do like any community engagement process, it really is all about expectation setting. Yes. So I think in some ways, right, Peter Jackson had it easy in that fans did not have an expectation that they were going to somehow radically shift to the way the story was told, in part because they're making all the movies at once. So it's not this ongoing relationship like we talked about, but also it's based on a book. So the story is set. Whereas they did a really bad job of expectation setting with the fans. And then that leads to a lot of disappointment.
Yes. Because it's one thing to be like, oh, we've learned that you're shipping these characters, and we think it's super cool that you ship these characters, but just so you know, that's not going to happen on the show. Like, to have said earlier on, we appreciate that, but Derek is straight or whatever. Like, something that was just closing the door on the idea of it in a way that never happened. And instead, they leaned into encouraging it, a lot of them. And then we're left in this situation where they had to walk back a lot of statements they've said in a way that felt kind of like an affront.
Betrayal.
A betrayal to the fans.
Yeah. But, you know, it's hard. You can see it either way, right? They have a commercial incentive to maintain fan investment, right?
Yep.
And so if you close that door completely, you run the risk of people just leaving the fandom or still accusing you, right, of being homophobic or something because you won't even consider that the character could be gay or bi. So it's a difficult tightrope to walk, and I don't know that there's a clear solution because everyone is going to react differently to whatever path you take. But yeah, we talked again before we came on that like it seems like the person who handles fan interaction best that we have covered. I mean, Peter Jackson was fine. The Lord of the Rings was fine, but that's a really different situation. Is Neil Gaiman. Like, just you gotta just be Neil Gaimaning it.
Just Neil Gaimaning all the time. But again, he's kind of had it easier too, because though what we were talking about him for was a television show, it was a limited series. And most of what he does is write books. So I think it's smart, but also is easier for him to say his own thing, which is, you know, canon is canon. Anything anyone says that's not specifically on the page is speculation, whether I say it or you say it or whatever. We're all speculating. It's easier to say that when you put out a book and the canon is the canon. When you're Jeff Davis writing a show, sure, the canon is the canon, but you're writing it right now. You're writing the canon. So it's hard for you to be like,
this can't happen. It's been set in stone because
why can't it happen? You haven't even put out a new season. You're in the middle of the show. Anything can happen.
So I don't know. I don't know what the right thing to do. I mean, I think the right thing to do, independent of the economic realities and commercial incentive is to be honest with people and say, this is my intent or this isn't my intent, and
Yep.
let that come with whatever it comes with.
Yeah.
But, it's not art. It's a commercial product.
Well, and that is clear that is how they view it because of the way that they have wielded the ship for commercial means always. Like
Yes.
the more they lean into it for like you have to vote for this thing or watch this thing or buy this thing. We didn't get into it with the beats but there was an interesting point in one of our articles where there's a scene at the end of season 3 that we did talk about where Derek has this vision of Stiles, even though they haven't really interacted for most of the season. There's also a scene at the end of season 4 where it seems like Derek is dying, and they have this moment where Stiles is like, they share this loaded eye contact, and Stiles keeps turning back to look at him instead of walking away when he's supposed to. And that's also in a season where they haven't had a ton of interaction. So there's this idea among fans who are feeling pretty queer baited at this point that it's interesting that you have a season where there's very little Stiles and Derek interaction, and then in the season finale you have this important emotional moment for the two of them just to get people to come back for the next season. It just feels like an element of manipulation to how the ship ended up being handled
for sure
down the line.
So I guess it's time to ask the question. Are we ready?
I would like to ask the question, is it queer baiting, queer coding, or queer canon? Kelsey.
I think it is. Well, it's definitely queer baiting. There's no way around. I think there also is some queer coding.
For sure.
I mean, I think Jeff Davis explicitly said there's hints that Stiles is bi. So they're coding him as bi, but
never making it explicit.
Clearly queer baiting. Do you feel differently?
Shockingly, no. I feel the same. When you get into the that we're on a ship video, I mean, come on.
Yeah.
That's queer baiting. And yeah, Stiles is definitely queer coded, though. That also makes me so sad that Jeff Davis explicitly is like, yeah, Stiles is queer coded. And then they make Dylan come out and say, like, I didn't mean that Stiles is bi. Like, God. Yeah. Why can't we ever have male bi characters? But that's its own conversation. Especially since one of his moments is with a female bi character on the show, being like, just so you know, I'm bi. I'm interested in both men and women. What about you? It's like, you get your female bi character, but never the guy. But yeah, I'm with you. Queer baiting, queer coding, not queer canon. It's a shame. No. What about this question of if we gender swapped one of the characters, would they be a couple? First of all, who are we gender swapping?
I mean, I want to gender swap Derek, if I'm being honest.
I don't have a problem with that.
And then I don't know. I don't know if they would be a couple because they don't really interact and they're very side characters who are tangential to one another. I feel like if you gender swap Stiles, you enter into the space of like, is she going to end up with Scott, his best friend who, is with him all the time? And doesn't it happen in the movie too? Doesn't he have a female friend who he's like going after the blonde and she's a cute brunette? And I'm generally familiar with 85 TeenWolf, but I have not seen it.
I don't remember that, but it's certainly possible.
She has a strange name. Her name's like Boof.
So Stiles isn't the only weird nickname in the movie?
Yeah, her name is Boof.
Love that. I wish there was a Boof in the show.
I feel like if Stiles was a lady, he'd be in Boof territory.
Gender swapping Derek gets into a whole lot of interesting stuff for reasons that we didn't have time to get into in this podcast, but Derek's backstory is already one of intense objectification and
I guess it makes that like less interesting if it's just a female character. I don't know. I don't feel strong. I don't feel strongly about the gender swap test, and it already is so explicitly queer baiting.
Exactly. So I don't know that we need that to support it. So what's our hypothesis about why it isn't canon?
I don't know. It's not like they couldn't. It's not like they couldn't have done it. It's not like MTV was telling them they couldn't have gay characters because they did.
They did have gay characters, multiples, who were in gay relationships.
And it's also not like they were building these two characters towards great love stories, or it really was somehow going to be essential to one of their story arcs that they were straight. I don't know what that would look like, but
Yeah. You know, all those stories where it's essential to their story arc that they're straight.
Well, I mean, if you have a long game in mind where you do have two characters ending up together.
I guess they would probably argue, that they intended all along for Stiles and Lydia to get together, but I don't know. I mean, they don't even really have, like, explicitly have them be together at the end. It's not like there's this big, like, romantic moment for the two of them. So
Yeah, they just hold hands, which you can hold hand with your
you can hold
friends.
hands with anybody. Exactly. So I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. Sometimes I feel like these things happen where it's like the way that things went down with Jeff and the fandom, there's no way he was ever going to make them canon because of the way that he felt
Yeah,
they were treating him, right?
right.
Like sometimes it just becomes it gets personal.
It's just too adversarial to then turn around and give the fans what they want. And to be fair, right, I think also in one of the articles, there was a quote from a fan who was like, I don't even care. No matter what they do, I'm not going to be happy with them. So at that
Yeah.
point, if you're the writer, you're like, well, then I'm not going to do something to make you happy if you're not going to be happy no matter what I do.
Yeah.
It just got real dark.
It did. So, I don't know. It just didn't work out. This
Yeah.
just wasn't the one. One day,
Mm-mm.
guys, there's gonna be a show where it's two dudes who aren't at first presented as queer, who have great chemistry, and the writer sees the great chemistry and then makes them canon.
Yeah.
Someday it's gonna happen.
But yeah, this was not that. So what's your rating on our queer baiting scale of 1? I don't know what these fans are talking about. These two are never in a room together. It's not happening. To 5, unrepentant queer baiting.
I think it's pretty explicit queer baiting. We're getting into like some textbook queer baiting areas with this. I don't know why, but I just feel like Jeff Davis did this accidentally. Like there's just something about him where I feel like has stumbled into this situation thinking it's all in good fun and then midway realized that it wasn't all in good fun and then tried to back out of it in a way that of course pissed off everyone in the fandom.
Right.
But that's I guess the only thing keeping me from making it a 5.
Yeah, he was definitely, I mean, he was playing with fire. I don't know. I think it is a 5. I think it sort of definitionally is. They were trying
Yeah.
to attract and maintain a queer audience who wanted to see queer representation, and it seems like they didn't have any real intention of following through on it because they could have.
I guess what's holding me up is just malicious, but it is unrepentant. It
Yeah.
is unrepentant queer baiting. So yeah, it's a 5. You're right.
Yeah.
You've convinced me. It's too bad all around. But anyway, still got some good times out of watching the show, right?
I mean, I enjoyed the show. I'm glad I watched the first 3 seasons. I very much enjoyed a lot of the characters, completely tangentially to the purpose of this podcast. But as
Yep.
I've told you many times, I particularly liked many of the adult characters and cared much more about what was happening with them.
They treat their parents well in the show.
I love Sheriff Stilinski. I really appreciate the arc that Papa Argent has. My main ship for this show, which did not work out, was Sheriff Stilinski and Scott's mom, Melissa McCall. I'm
I
disappointed
wanted them to get together so badly.
that didn't happen. Yeah, I enjoyed watching the show.
Oh, I guess I should check in. How are we feeling about fan fiction? I have to do my weekly fan fiction check-in.
I would say no more movement since
Yeah.
Double OQ, and still trying to track down those fun parody.
Okay,
fanfics.
we're gonna find you some parody fanfics. Send us parody fanfics if anyone has anything good. What are we talking about next week? Or 2 weeks? Every week, every time we do this, I say next week, and I mean 2 weeks.
Next
from now.
time.
Yeah.
Next episode. It's another one of our not specific episodes. We've done this a few times now. I think each time we've done this, we're like, we're doing something a little different. And I don't know that we can still say that.
No, now it's becoming a thing that we do.
But, we did an episode on how there's not enough focus on women in shipping. We talked in our ships, we're not going to cover about the lack of people of color, but there's another real gap in the shipping conversation, something that is being overlooked, and it is not acceptable.
You're right.
And that is sitcoms and other comedy
Sitcoms,
shows.
people. Not one of the ships we've talked about has been a half hour. What's the deal with that?
Or any comedy, because one of our examples is an hour-long comedy
True.
procedural. But yeah, that was something that we noticed as we've been talking about this and going through. There is a dearth of shipping around characters in comedic shows, and we want to know why. We want to explore that and explore some pairs that we would think people would ship. I mean, they're close as hell in their shows. What's going on?
Some of them might spring immediately to mind for you, so I'm sure we will be bringing up some beloved friend ships that could be ships.
But we'll get more into that next time. What if people want to get in touch with us, Maddie? What if they want to send me that 007 parody that I'm looking for?
Get her a 007 parody, people. We need your help. If you find it or anything else that you would like to say to us, please do reach out. Our email is ltbkpod@gmail.com. We are on Twitter and Tumblr at ltbkpod. And hey, while you're at it, leave us a review. Let the Boys Kiss comes out every other Friday at 6 o'clock Eastern, wherever you get your podcasts.